everybody, and welcome back to the Female Health Mastermind. We are now in module 4, and I'm bringing you this one obviously as a pre-recorded module. It is a little bit more of a longer time coming. I had some personal things going on, so sorry about the delay, but we are going to be diving in today, and today we're going to be talking about perimenopause and menopause. Now, I'll probably split these modules into maybe 2 parts. I have the little timer on in front of me just because I don't want this to be a full hour pre-recorded session, because that can be really hard to sit down and actually watch, because I know all of your time is very, very valuable. So I will probably, as I said, break these down into 2 parts so that you can watch them a little bit easier, and it's not going to take up a lot of your time. So, perimenopause and menopause. I'm actually really excited to bring you this module because, like everything when it comes to female health, I feel like it's just still maybe a topic that isn't really discussed. There's sometimes like taboo around it. It's not really talked about. And as I said, like everything with female health, all the stages we go through, we don't really know what to expect until we're going through them. And I've been talking to a few of you in the group, and I know you've said that maybe you are approaching perimenopause, you're going through it, but you feel like you weren't really, expecting or knowing what to expect, and not getting a lot of support even from the GP. Now, as I said, I am in no way a GP, I'm in no way a medical professional, but there are a lot of things that we can do on the holistic side of things that can help with perimenopause and symptoms and just learning a little bit more about our bodies. There is, for some reason, some stigma attached to perimenopause and talking about it, and I just want us to kind of get rid of that, because it's one of those things that we all know is inevitably happening. And I know if anybody's like me, when I was younger, growing up, we all know that the stages are coming, but we don't really know what to be expecting. And the same with, pregnancy, postpartum, we don't know what to expect until we've gone through it. So hopefully we are going to be able to understand it a little bit more and be more prepared. And to be honest, learning a lot about it has really changed my mindset when we're talking about perimenopause and menopause, because I think it's almost something that we see that should be feared. And I'm not sure if anybody else feels like that, but I feel like growing up, it's like, we're getting a menopause, it means we're getting old, it means, obviously we're not able to reproduce anymore, and we have this fear around it. But really starting to learn about it and understand it has really alleviated that fear for me, and it's a time in life that we can enjoy and kind of just manage and appreciate as best we can. So I'm not going to ramble any longer. I just also want to preface this by saying that I have not yet went through perimenopause, so I can't relate to any of the symptoms firsthand. And like every single thing, every single female and every single stage in our lives, we're all going to experience things completely differently. So what you may be experiencing or may experience when you go through perimenopause is going to be completely different to somebody else. I thought this quote was really fitting for this module. So nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood, and now is the time to understand more so that we fear less. And it's by Marie Curie. And as I just kind of mentioned, the more that we can learn about it and become educated around this time in our lives that we're all inevitably going to go through, the better. Similar to our menstrual cycles, I mean, when we were in school, we didn't learn a lot about those, and it's only now that we're all a lot older that we're starting to understand how our cycle works and how to, act around our cycle. And if we can get as much information as we can leading up to perimenopause and knowing what to expect, it's just going to serve us so much better. And as I said, allow us to really thrive through that point in our life rather than dreading it and thinking that it's something that is a really negative experience, because I feel like that's the stigma sometimes around it. There's also been studies done on women in their 60s and their 70s saying that they feel absolutely fantastic and it's the happiest they've felt throughout their life, and we're going to touch on that a little bit as we go through. And the Japanese word for menopause, and I'm going to absolutely butcher this, but it's kanuki, and that actually translates to renewal years or energy. So it can be seen as this new stage in our life where it can be called again like the second puberty, where we're just growing into ourselves again and just starting a whole new chapter in our lives. So I just want to take that kind of like stigma and fear away from it. First thing we need to do is actually define perimenopause. So as I said, some people will call perimenopause like our second puberty, and it's not just this like chaotic hormonal fluctuation, but it's actually a series of events, and we're going to go into the actual events soon. Perimenopause is basically the kind of period of time that usually you'll hear people talk and call menopause. So menopause is a series of events, and it's where, as I said, you kind of experience all of those symptoms that we talk about, like the hot flushes, the anxiety and things like that. And then menopause is actually just one point in time, which I'll go through in a minute. So perimenopause and the early years of menopause are also like a critical window for health. And what I mean by that is research has shown that when we go through these different phases in our female lifespan, we are a little bit more vulnerable. So similar to pregnancy and postpartum, there are times when if we have existing health issues, or if we're not kind of putting things in place to prevent health issues, it's a time when we are more vulnerable for those health issues to kind of exacerbate. So that's why we need to really be kind of fronting things, making sure we're prepared for these stages in our life, and just more or less taking care of ourselves the whole way through, so that we can prevent as many of these kind of health issues or existing health issues from getting worse in these times. It is a good thing because it means that we can make small little changes to prevent things from kind of getting out of hand in terms of our health, and just really put things in place to protect our future health as well. There's also a little shift in our kind of brain as well. So think of it as like a recalibration. When we go through perimenopause, your brain basically recalibrates, so it gets like a bit of a software upgrade. So similar to your computer, when on your phone, when you go through your software upgrade, it's absolutely fine. Once the software upgrade is completed, there's no issues. However, if there is a little glitch while you're going through that recalibration, that's where we can start to see some issues. And it has been said that if you, for example, have maybe a history of Alzheimer's in your family, then during this kind of more vulnerable time when your brain is going through that little like recalibration, if you are not putting things in place to protect yourself and your health, then those symptoms of memory loss that you will experience sometimes in perimenopause can lead to, down the line, potentially having dementia and Alzheimer's. Now, I am not saying that you are going to get Alzheimer's in perimenopause. It's just something to be aware of. And I myself have Alzheimer's in my family history. So even just being able to give my mum this information, and for me to have this information, because you will suffer sometimes as a symptom with little like memory losses, and similar like you do when you're having maybe a baby. Some people call it baby brain or postpartum, because your brain is going through that recalibration and you are a little bit more vulnerable. But if you're not doing things, as I said, to protect yourself, then those can kind of lead into more dementia and Alzheimer's down the line. So we really want to be kind of looking after our health in that respect as well. And everything just remodels itself, especially our immune system. So again, we are more vulnerable to getting different kind of illnesses and health issues, and that's why we really just want to be looking after ourselves through this time, protecting our cardiovascular health as well, which we're going to be exploring, and that's going to come down a lot to your training, your nutrition, and your lifestyle, which is obviously what we are focusing on. So menopause, as I said, is just one moment in time. So basically, you go through perimenopause, and then when you have had your, when it's 12 months after your last bleed, that's when you reach menopause, and after that day, you are post-menopausal. So just to kind of make the differentiation between those, because I know we all talk about menopause in terms of that long period of time where we're going maybe through those symptoms and this series of events, which we're going to cover now in a second. But menopause is just that day and time, 12 months after your last period. That's menopause, and then you're post-menopausal after that. So we do have 4 stages. It starts with the lowering of progesterone. So we're not going to be ovulating as much. Our cycles aren't going to be as regular. And some of you might still be getting a period every month, but you may not be ovulating every month. And that's where your progesterone levels start to decrease. Then we move into more of like an estrogen roller coaster. Now, this is probably where you will experience or may experience those typical symptoms that we associate with perimenopause. So things like, the hot flushes, maybe the anxiety, the night sweats, and it's because estrogen is again on this roller coaster and your progesterone is lowering at the same time. So this is where we can see things getting quite similar to what you may have experienced before, in the early stages of your periods when you were younger, when that estrogen is kind of on a roller coaster and very up and down. Then we move into a stage of lower estrogen. So this is where progesterone and estrogen are starting to both become a lot lower, and we have lower levels of those. And then stage 4 is insulin resistance. So a lot of women may experience insulin resistance when they're going through perimenopause and then into menopause and post-menopause, because we don't have the anti-inflammatory effects anymore from our progesterone and our estrogen. Our estrogen, as we know, is our anabolic hormone, so because it's low, we don't have those effects that is really helping us deal with our carbohydrates and our blood sugar. So this is where we can see insulin resistance, and this is where things like your body composition may change. It may be a little bit more difficult to, what you were doing to maybe lose weight and stay in shape when you were a little bit younger in your reproductive years may not work the same for you now. It doesn't mean that you cannot, keep your body composition and change your body composition and lose weight. It doesn't mean that at all. But a lot of women may experience insulin resistance, and it's how we kind of manage that is going to make the difference. So this is just a bit of a timeline, just to kind of put that into perspective for you. So early menopause, very early menopause, it can start anywhere from kind of late 30s, which is quite early, into kind of early 40s. And again, that's going to be very different for everybody. What I would say is, although it's not definitely going to be exactly the same as your mum or your aunt or your grannies, it's very useful to kind of ask maybe your mum or sisters who are older than you, have maybe gone through perimenopause, what theirs was like, because it can be hereditary and quite similar. So if they had, quite severe symptoms, you may be expecting to potentially feel the same as if you had, quite easy. And when I say easy, I mean periods that maybe you didn't have a lot of symptoms, you weren't in a lot of pain with cramping, then you can potentially look at your perimenopause maybe being the same. And same with if you had periods that were, really, really heavy, you had a lot of symptoms, you had the migraines, the sore breasts, then your perimenopause may be similar. Now, that is not definite, but you can kind of get an idea from asking older sisters, ask your mum to see how theirs was. You may start to see symptoms in this kind of early phase. So you'll have regular periods with some signs of change, and that can last anywhere from kind of 2 to 5 years. Then as we kind of move on into the transition, your periods may become a little bit more irregular. Your cycle length may differ. So you may have cycle lengths that are kind of different between 7 days and more, so 7 days kind of longer or shorter, and there'll just be a little bit of irregularity there. You may skip some periods, so maybe going like 60 days without a flow, and this is where you're going through this main kind of transition, and this is where you are going to feel that kind of estrogen roller coaster, and this can last kind of around 3 years, and then you'll have your final menstruation or your final period in perimenopause. And then going into late menopause, towards menopause, you will have 1 year without a bleed, and then that 1 year on is your menopause. So I hope that makes sense and kind of puts it in a bit of a timeline for you. And yeah, it says like it might drag out actually a bit longer than 12 months without a bleed, but once you kind of get to that 12-month mark, you are into menopause. Estrogen. So I know we've talked about estrogen a lot in the previous modules, but I just want to go through to show how it can impact our bodies and our minds when it is slightly decreasing. And I don't want anyone, I feel like we sometimes again fear that our estrogen levels are declining and we're losing all of our estrogen and we're losing all of our good hormone. Yes, those reserves are declining, but it's just the stage of life that we're in, and it's a natural process. We do have estrogen reserves in the body. We're just using a different type of estrogen when we get to perimenopause and then obviously into post-menopause. So I don't want anybody panicking that, oh my god, we're losing our estrogen and we're not going to have any reserves. We do. It's just the natural stage that we're going through. So we do need estrogen, but we can't change, as I said, the fact that it's decreasing. It controls the menstrual cycle and manages blood sugar and appetite. So if you remember, we talked about that in the previous modules. So that's why your insulin resistance may come into play, because your estrogen levels aren't as high to keep and help managing your blood sugar and your appetite. It is anabolic, so it helps build us up, it helps keep our lean body mass. So this is where body composition can be impacted, and this is why your weight training and getting your protein in is so important the whole way through life, but especially when you're going through perimenopause and into that kind of postmenopausal phase. And the research has shown that it's never too late to start weight training in it. Even if you are postmenopausal, it's never too late to start. You're always going to get some benefits of any form of resistance training on your bones and on your muscle mass. We may see increases in anxiety and depression because, again, estrogen has that nice effect on our brain. So when our estrogen levels rise, it kind of hypersensitizes those serotonin receptors in our brain. So serotonin is like our happy hormone, which is great. But the problem comes when that estrogen crashes. So obviously when we're on this more of a roller coaster in this perimenopause phase, this is where you may see signs of anxiety or depression, because you are on that kind of, they call it like a serotonin dump, because when your estrogen rises, it really hypersensitizes those serotonin receptors in your brain. It makes you feel great. But then that estrogen crashes and that serotonin gets dumped as well. So this is where we can see that starting to happen. Estrogen lowers and controls body temperature. So again, when we don't have as much estrogen, or when it's on that roller coaster, this is where you might find things like your night sweats and your temperature getting high. And then just the three different types like I mentioned. So estradiol was the one we would have talked about when we're in our reproductive years. That's the main kind of estrogen that we use. Estriol is the one that we use when we are pregnant, and then estrone is the one that we use when we're going through perimenopause and into kind of postmenopause. So that's the one that we have basically in reserve, and it's actually made by our adrenal glands. Now this is really important because as we know, our adrenal glands are what we use to respond to stress. So if you are highly stressed, your adrenal glands are not going to be producing as much estrogen that you need. And this is why stress management, like in all the phases of life, but especially in perimenopause and postmenopause, is so important to keep our HPA axis regulated. And we're going to be talking about that a little bit more. Now, going into progesterone, as we know, progesterone is the hormone that we love. It's our calming hormone. It's like our caretaking hormone. And it takes a lot of energy to produce progesterone because we need to ovulate, which is a really taxing and energetic process in our menstrual cycle. We need to ovulate to produce progesterone. So this is why it's usually the first one to deplete when we go through perimenopause. Metabolism can be impacted because, as we know, when we produce progesterone, it has an impact on the thyroid. It increases our basal metabolic rate. So we're not potentially burning as many calories. So that can have a little bit of an impact on our metabolism. More prone to inflammation, again, because progesterone is anti-inflammatory. And we can see it, as I said, impact our thyroid. So some women actually can run into some thyroid issues during perimenopause, and the symptoms can be quite similar to the symptoms of perimenopause. So it is worth getting thyroid tests done if you suspect that you maybe have a thyroid issue. We don't have as much as a calming effect on the brain, so again, that's another issue with it, which may be causing higher levels of anxiety, and we are more susceptible to painful periods. So again, when you're going through perimenopause, you may have had quite decent periods the whole way, maybe through your reproductive years, but this is like, again, our second puberty. So you may find that your periods are now a little bit more painful because number one, estrogen is on that roller coaster, but number two, we don't have the amounts of progesterone that maybe we once did come in and really calm and help with those painful periods. So you may experience a little bit more pain with your bleeds as you go through perimenopause. Symptoms, and again, these are going to be completely different to absolutely everybody. As I said, they can start as early as 38, but it's going to completely depend on the individual, and 38 is quite early for going through perimenopause, and it's going to be individual for everyone. Ask your mum to see how hers was, and again, as I said, that will give you quite a good idea. But these symptoms, everybody's going to experience different ones, and they're mostly coming from obviously that kind of roller coaster of estrogen really rising and then crashing, and then obviously the lower levels of estrogen and progesterone as we go through further into late perimenopause and postmenopause. So things like vaginal dryness, low libido, those are all symptoms of lower estrogen. Brain fog, breast pain, migraines, heavy periods. As you can see, the symptoms are quite similar to those of quite a bad menstrual cycle when you're going through those estrogen dominant effects, like the migraines and the breast pain. And then you may actually find that you develop histamine intolerance. So if you find that you are maybe getting hay fever that's not in season, or maybe getting hay fever and you've never had hay fever before, things like rashes and food intolerances, it can be a sign that you have histamine intolerance. So we're having more reactions to different things because we don't have, as I said, the estrogen and the progesterone to act as anti-inflammatory in our bodies. So this is why these things show up. And a really simple histamine test is to basically scratch your stomach about an inch or 2 inches above your belly button. If it leaves, a really red line, it can be a sign that you have histamine intolerance. Now, obviously, that is not a very scientific test to do, but it is a really simple test to show that if you maybe experience histamine intolerance. This is also where autoimmune diseases can be exacerbated as well. So if you are someone who maybe has suffered with endometriosis, if you have an autoimmune disease, you may find that the reduction in estrogen and progesterone and going through perimenopause can exacerbate these symptoms as well. And this is why it's really, really important to really look after, obviously, your nutrition, your lifestyle, and training as well, to try and mitigate those symptoms as much as possible. Treatment. Now, we're going to talk about a few treatment options. The one thing I'm not going to talk about is HRT, hormone replacement therapy, because, as I said, I'm not a medical professional. Now, HRT is sometimes like hell yes for some people, sometimes it's a hell no, and again, it's completely individualized. So that's something that you want to talk to your GP about, or a holistic practitioner is going to be able to advise you on that as well. The only thing I would say, if you are going down the route of HRT, some women find it absolutely incredible, but what I would say is try and get biological identical hormones. So what I mean by that is, when we talked about birth control and the pill, remember when we talked about progestin? So progestin in your pill is the synthetic form of progesterone. It doesn't do the same thing, and sometimes it has actually the opposite effects of progesterone. We love progesterone, but progestin is not the same. So make sure that when you are potentially going down the HRT route, that you get bioidentical hormones like progesterone, and you can get them. So that's a conversation obviously you can have with your GP, or, as I said, a holistic practitioner, and they'll be able to advise you on those. Now, the first thing we need to talk about is soothing our nervous system. We need to build health and resilience in your nervous system so that we can really cope with a lot of the things coming up through perimenopause. And as I said, a lot of these things we need to be doing throughout life anyway, but particularly now. We need to focus on 3 parts. So our autonomic nervous system, our HPA axis, which helps us deal with stress, and our circadian rhythm. So losing first progesterone and then estrogen can be a bit destabilizing for our brain and our nervous system. And when I talked about that kind of like recalibration to get them in order to adapt, we have to go through a process that requires a certain degree of kind of overall health and resilience. And this is why we need to really focus on our nervous system and managing stress as best we can. I know it's easier said than done, but it's going to help us feel better now, even if you are pre-perimenopause, and when you get to perimenopause, and for our long-term health. So these are not just things that we should be doing once we get to perimenopause or postmenopause. We need to be doing these from now, because it's going to really build that resilience and bank that kind of mental resilience on our nervous system for later on. So our autonomic nervous system, this is the system that basically runs without us having to think about it. So things like our breathing, our digestive system, and it's split into 2 parts. So our sympathetic and our parasympathetic. So usually you'll hear these talked about in either fight or flight or rest and digest. Now, we need a certain amount of fight or flight, obviously, to deal with certain situations throughout the day, but it's when we're chronically in that state is the issue, and when we kind of then go into that HPA like dysregulation, when our adrenal glands start suffering, and when we're not able to kind of switch back into that rest and digest really easily. So we really want to practice being able to switch between both. So some things you can do: get into nature. So easy, but so beneficial. Get into nature, get a walk, and it's a really nice way to activate that rest and digest part of our autonomic nervous system. build social connections. So join groups, join groups of women who are maybe in the same stage as you. Usually there are community groups that maybe go for walks, like go on trips together, even just, going out with your friends, having coffees, build those social connections, because that releases our oxytocin hormone, and that's kind of like our love hormone, our cuddle hormone, some people call it, and it really, again, helps us kind of get into that rest and digest, and just really calms our nervous system. Very similar to when you maybe have a baby, or even your first baby, and you join like parent and baby groups. Building those connections is just so vital for our kind of mental health and our nervous system as well. HRV, you might have heard of HRV when you see it on like your watch, so your Fitbit or your Oura Ring, and it's a measure of our parasympathetic nervous system. So the higher it is, the higher you're able to respond to your breathing. So in order to kind of help that, one of the biggest ways to improve that is to really practice and focus on your vagus nerve. And you may hear people on social media talking about working on your vagal tone. So it's basically a nerve that runs from your brain right down, and it kind of makes sure everything in the body is, okay, and everything's kind of working fine. So we really want to tune into that vagal tone and vagus nerve and really train it. In order to calm your vagus nerve, you want to be sending it signals of safety and calm. So again, things like yoga, things like breath work, really just tuning into that vagal tone and making sure that you're able to breathe and you're able to regulate your nervous system. So it's being able to kind of switch from those fight or flight situations when you need to, and come back down into that kind of rest and digest. Cold water exposure is a great one for regulating kind of your autonomic nervous system and being able to switch from fight or flight into that rest or digest. I know not everybody's going to have access to either an ice bath or getting out for a cold dip, or necessarily wants to do that every morning. I know for me, cold water exposure isn't something that I do regularly. However, I have started doing 30 seconds to a minute in the shower. So I'll have my warm shower in the morning, and then I'll swap I'll swap the shower to cold, and I'll just stand under it. I'll take a breath, stand under it for 30 seconds to a minute. Now, I am also going to put a disclaimer that the cold water here in the Middle East, sometimes it's not freezing cold. It's cold enough for me to, have to really focus on my breathing. But if it is something that you want to practice, I would do it in the shower. Just have your warm shower, step out for 30 seconds, switch the water to cold, and then just take a deep breath and stand under it just for as long as you can. And really, when you're under, just really practice your breathing. Really good way to get into that rest and digest, and just be able to switch and really and just a really good way to increase your vagal tone. Another really easy one, and this is more kind of to help with cortisol levels in the morning, is to get an ice cube or an ice face roller and put it around your face first thing in the morning, because in the morning our cortisol levels are nice and high, and we want them to we want to be alert, and we want them to start off nice and high. So putting an ice cube on your face or a face roller is a really nice way to kind of start the morning as well. Now, our HPA axis, this is our communication between our brain and our adrenal glands, and the one that deals with stress. So you may have heard of things like adrenal fatigue, adrenal dysfunction, and this is when our adrenal glands are pumping out so much cortisol and stress hormone, and it can kind of switch back, and they just end up like getting really fatigued and really exhausted, and we call that kind of adrenal dysfunction. We do not want to get to that place, because it can be quite difficult to rectify that and get back into a place where your adrenal glands are working nice and efficiently. Can impact estrogen production in menopause, as I mentioned, because our adrenal glands also help produce the estrogen that we need in later life. So when you're highly stressed and when your adrenal glands are working overtime to produce lots and lots of cortisol, that's going to take place over producing estrogen. So we really want to be managing that. It helps keep our blood sugar levels stable as well. Another reason why we want to be looking after this axis, because as we know, we are going to potentially face insulin resistance. We want to be doing everything to try and mitigate that as we go through perimenopause. And magnesium and B vitamins as well are two vitamins that are really efficient at kind of managing this axis, and I know we've talked about those before because they're quite good at regulating the nervous system and really helping us calm and activating our energy as well. So get a good B complex in, and your magnesium glycinate, which you should all be taking already. Other things that you might experience if you are going through HPA dysfunction and you're not able to really switch into that rest or digest are things like low libido, insomnia, decrease in muscle mass, depression, insulin resistance. And if you notice, these are also symptoms of perimenopause. So this is why when you're going through perimenopause can actually make your HPA dysfunction worse, and vice versa. So as I said, it's really, really important to start building that mental resilience now, and our nervous system resilience now, so that we kind of mitigate as much of that as possible when we go through that stage in our life. And the last one we're going to look at here before I just end this one, and then I'll put everything else in the next module, is our circadian rhythm. So every single cell has a clock, and it's on a 24-hour schedule, and our circadian rhythm is what controls that. Cortisol and melatonin are the two hormones that we need to control it. So cortisol is nice and high in the morning, and we want it to taper off as we get closer to sleep, and melatonin is the opposite, so it's low in the morning, and we want it to naturally rise as we get closer to bedtime. We really want to be sticking to the routine that our body wants. So in this stage of life, it's so important that we try to get into that regular sleeping time, that we're not eating, super, super late and telling our body at 12 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock in the morning, that it's, time to eat a big meal. We don't want to be having loads of blue light exposure, because again, that's what tells your cells that it's morning time, because morning light is mostly blue light. So doing things like reducing your screen time, changing your light to orange light from 6 or 7 o'clock onwards is really going to help. And you really just want to get your body into a nice regular system to really regulate that circadian rhythm. So keeping to that schedule is an excellent way to promote general health, including health of your metabolism, mood, sleep, bones, and of course, as we just mentioned, our HPA axis. So brain is the main one that actually controls cortisol and melatonin. Melatonin, as I said, promotes sleep and has many other jobs, such as maintaining healthy digestion, your immune function, and your metabolism. So it's not just about getting regular sleep. Like, these hormones are working together to control everything, like your metabolism and your immune function. And as we mentioned before, this is a really vulnerable time for all of those things. We want to be putting in place everything we can to help. I mentioned already eating late at night. We really don't want to be doing that. We want to be telling our body, okay, we've finished eating, it's time to rest and digest so we can wind down for sleep. Our brain is already sensitive as at this time, as we're going through that recalibration, and it's really sensitive as well, because our estrogen and our progesterone are also lowering, so it has to get used to having lower amounts of those hormones that are really good for our brain. It sends beneficial signals to our clock genes that regulate insulin, and this is where I say here protein by 10 o'clock. So there is research to say that this sends signals to our clock genes and helps them control metabolism. So getting protein in first thing in the morning before 10 o'clock is really, really beneficial, and it's been shown in the research to be so. So again, these are things that aren't just important in perimenopause. We should be getting a really good portion of protein in first thing in the morning, or as soon as we can in the morning with our breakfast, the whole way through, to really help with hormone balance and blood sugar balance as well. Reducing alcohol, I know it's not one that anyone wants to hear. Again, we should be doing this where and when we can. I'm not saying to quit alcohol, because I would be an absolute hypocrite. I enjoy a glass of wine as much as the next lady, but if we can reduce it where and when we can, because alcohol again has an impact on melatonin, so it's going to affect sleep. It also causes more inflammation in the body, and we all know that just trying to reduce alcohol can massively help with our health as well. Warm bath or shower before bed is also a really good one, because it really higher our temperature obviously when we're in there, but then it quickly lowers it after, and that can really help with us falling asleep and kind of then obviously getting into that nice sleep routine. So this is about half an hour. I'm going to leave this part 1 here, and then we'll go on to part 2 in the next one. So I hope you've enjoyed that so far, and I will see you in the next one.